excited to have Curtis Hite, CEO and Chairman of Improving. Curtis will be discussing how to establish and maintain trust. Curtis, floor is yours.
Thank you, Max. I appreciate that. And before I get going, I just want to reemphasize that the topic we will be discussing today, stakeholder trust, it's a very broad topic. It's one that we have condensed right now into our own 17-week, 17-session course into about 40 minutes of content. However, at the same time, that means that interacting, putting those questions out to the moderator is a very important aspect of this. We can be flexible when it comes to adjusting the agenda and the topics we discuss today. Without that, I'll also say that the first and the last slides have the most text on them, and that's for a reason. The rest, it's really to represent ideas. And I want to start off with a quote. Right? What is this one thing? There's one thing that is common to every individual, relationship, team, family, organization, nation, economy, and civilization throughout the world. There's one thing which, if removed, will destroy the most powerful government, the most successful business, the most thriving economy, the most influential leadership, the greatest friendship, the strongest character, and the deepest love. There's one thing that, if developed and leveraged, has a potential to create unparalleled success and prosperity in every dimension of life. And there's one thing that is least understood, most neglected, and most underestimated possibility of our time. And that one thing is trust. This comes from the introduction of Stephen Covey's The Speed of Trust book, which has become very instrumental in my life. One of the most influential books that I have read, both personally and professionally. And I believe in almost everything this book discusses. And today, I want to talk about stakeholder trust. But before I do so, I need to set a little bit of context. First, on the concept of trust itself. Trust is a very complex topic to discuss. The first thing I'm going to mention is that as soon as somebody like myself or anybody else starts discussing trust, you're putting a target on your chest. How can this person be talking about trust when this experience has happened, or when they don't notice their own blind spots? So it really sets expectations that cannot be lived into. And I'm not apologetic about this, because trust overall is something we aspire to. And as you'll hear a little bit later on, and I'll repeat this, every interaction we have with another human, with an organization, is an opportunity to build trust or destroy trust. And in fact, it's almost unavoidable that we could never live into a promise of building trust in all situations. It's hard to define, and it's human. And the most interesting thing about it being human is it's non-deterministic. What I mean by that is I can do the exact same things today, and it builds trust with a person, yet somehow 2 years from now, me doing the same things could actually erode trust. So this is a very complex subject that we are going to try to discuss today. And hopefully some of the takeaways will be an inspiration to explore this further in your own life, whether it's a personal relationship or whether it's a professional relationship. The second thing I want to talk about is that word stakeholder. What are we talking about stakeholders? Well, Improving, and I myself am a member of a movement called the Conscious Capitalism movement. This is a movement that is based on 4 primary pillars, that businesses and capitalism are fundamentally forces of good, but they focus on these 4 pillars of a purpose beyond just making money, an emphasis on good company culture, and a leadership that is very mindful, right? This conscious leadership of awareness and courage. But there's also this notion of a stakeholder, not a shareholder model. And we'll go into this a little bit more, but it's not, this is the definition that I am using when I use the term stakeholder trust. So going into an overview of trust that allows us to then broaden it into stakeholder trust. A lot of what you're going to see is coming from this book right here, The Speed of Trust. I believe that Stephen Covey has quite a good insight into how complex trust is and how important it is as well. As a few examples, what are the positive impacts of trust? And if you really look at Forbes, this is just recently in the America's largest employers and best places to work, you might say trust is 2/3 of the criteria, of the questions that these best places to work are asking about. But when you look at the results, these companies that are leading and trying to emphasize trust, either directly or indirectly, have an annualized return of 3 times that of those that are not focusing on it. And just let that settle in, the economic, the business impact that this topic has. Maybe more individually, or if you're an employer, if you look at this stat, that a 10% increase in trust within an organization has the same effect on employee satisfaction as more than 30% increase in pay. I mean, that is significant, because pay goes, in our world, pay goes a long way towards employee satisfaction. These are some of the positive aspects. And if you were to go out and Google positive aspects, positive impacts of trust, statistics around trust or distrust, you are going to find statistic after statistic after statistic of the positive impacts of high trust environments. And I've just selected a few here. And whether we agree with the specific stats or not, what is almost unavoidably true is the fact that trust and increasing trust within an organization, within our relationships, has a positive impact on those relationships. Well, what about the opposite? And I'm not making a political statement in any way here, but this is an image that probably provokes emotion in many people. And this is the consequence of distrust. This is about our voter election and the distrust in the system. And I'm going to talk about this. Perceived or reality doesn't matter. The distrust is there. And distrust can be an extremely destructive force. And so with all the positive that can occur, it should be no surprise that the anti-pattern of this can be extremely destructive, as we got to see in so many ways this year. The fear and distrust around the COVID environment, the social unrest, distrust that we have that bled into things like our police force, election distrust. It goes on and on and on, the negative consequences when it doesn't exist. Another point that I want to make when we are talking about trust is this concept of trust accounting. Almost every single interaction, as I stated a little bit earlier, has the opportunity to either build or destroy trust. And when I say every interaction, I really mean that. My interaction with my daughter last night at her graduation was an opportunity to build or destroy trust. My hope is that I built it. That is certainly my intent. If we are unmindful, if we are unconscious, if we are not thinking about it, we can accidentally withdraw trust from a trust account. And trust is very individualistic. It is one-on-one connection. Some people may completely trust me, and there may be some people that completely distrust me for various reasons. But what I can say is there is an account. Withdrawals tend to be way more expensive than deposits, but there is always an opportunity to start saving and building those trust accounts today, no matter where they have been in the past. A concept from Stephen Covey that we see here is the fact that trust really has many components to it. Two broad categories. This is what Stephen Covey calls the cores of trust. We have competency, things like our capabilities and the results we deliver. And then there are things that build trust, such as integrity and intent. And as an example that these are not the same thing, have you ever met somebody that you can actually say, man, their intent is so good, their attitude is incredible, yet they can't get the job done? This is a professional type example of these concepts. When you look at that, they have a great attitude, but do not have the ability to deliver result or the work ethic or something that's in there. So you can trust their intent, but you can actually distrust their ability to deliver. And so when we look at this model, this high-level model here, we have to remember to not overemphasize just one aspect of this tree that's represented, that all of these become important to some degree. And depending on who we are, there are some people that value results and capabilities way above the intent or integrity. Have you ever heard somebody say, it's just about getting it done? Or have you heard somebody that it really isn't about the result, it's about their intent or their integrity? So these are the cores and areas, but perhaps a little bit more when I talk about this. And there's a key, and I should have mentioned this a little bit earlier. I put a key on some of these slides because it's really a point that I really want to emphasize. It's a key point here. And this is one. As humans, far too often we fall into the trap of not assuming good intent. This is one of my favorite sayings because it is so true. We tend to judge others by their perceived actions, yet we judge ourselves by our, and I should have put in here, good intent. And just think about this, because we're holding a different standard in general. And you might want to deny this at first, but in an unmindful state, in our subconscious state, this is where humans will gravitate towards. It is just a natural tendency. So there's no, and even in that statement, I'm assuming a good intent. It's a natural tendency to fall into this trap. Nobody intends to fall into this trap, but they do. Can you imagine a world where instead, when you see somebody that maybe has wronged you, you try to find the way that maybe they assumed, or maybe they had a good intent, but it didn't deliver. Or maybe simply they didn't have bad intent, but it still happened. This is very key to establishing trust. And I find this in my value system, that part of the tree, the four cores, and assuming the good in others, not assuming the bad in others, has a tremendous ability to have an impact in every relationship or even the world itself. Along these lines, if you think about those four cores, there are 13 behaviors that Covey speaks about. If you're not a big reader, what I'm going to suggest is, and you would like this topic, that these 13 behaviors, they're about 6 to 10 pages each in the book, meaning you could read one in about 10, 15, maybe if I'm a slow reader, maybe 30 minutes. But you get great insight into this part of the book, and you could actually start in the middle of the book and still derive value.
Hey, Curtis.
Yes, I
we,
saw.
we had a question come in that I think before we move on might be a good one you can tackle. They wrote, should the results and intent be in sync? I think there is something wrong if they're not in alignment.
Well, and I'm going to go back to the tree. This is a great question, Max. Should is an interesting word, right? And I'm going to be, it is certainly what I like personally. It is certainly what I strive for. But let's say I have good intent, yet I'm not able to deliver. I don't have the capability. I really want to, yet I still don't have. I think that actually is not necessarily a bad thing in somebody, but it may represent, as you mentioned, an incongruence, and simply being aware of that. I often use the word sincere and serious. A lot of my friends, and let's take a health topic of weight, they are very sincere when they mention, I want to lose weight. How many people have you heard say that? And do you think they're lying? I don't believe they're lying. Yet somehow they may not lose weight. So they were very sincere, good intent, but maybe they weren't serious about it enough. The same is true that I find in the professional realm about personal growth. In our own company, I hear this is one of the biggest aspects that people want. They want to grow. They want to learn and grow. And in a company like Improving, I believe them. They want to do that, but that's hard. It's hard to get 4 ideal hours of meaningful growth. So they don't deliver the result, yet they had good intent. And while that is not ideal, I can certainly understand how people want and have good intent and are unable to follow through. And this is not me wiggling out. The most effective people at building trust, as I mentioned, are those that can do both or all of these things at the same time. Some people may have challenges at the top part of the tree and are great at the bottom. Some people, and I actually think that in politics, you can probably name some of these people, are great at delivering results, yet somehow they break down in the trust in the bottom part of this tree and the roots here. Hopefully I answered that question. Is there another one?
Yeah, there is another one that came through, Curtis, that kind of is in line with that. Vladimir wrote, I managed to distract stakeholders and they shy away from a deal without bringing up the trust issue. Distrust on the extreme form manifests as disorder and fight. In most common cases, the consequence of distrust is nothing is happening. How critical is it to discuss the intent in the very beginning before starting any significant initiative?
Okay, now you're speaking one of my trust love languages, to be honest, and I'm going to jump to this one. And when we look at the 13 behaviors of trust, everything from talk straight down to the 13th behavior of extending trust, what we are talking about is clarifying expectations here up front, early, get that shared vision and get the shared agreement. And it's very difficult to clarify every expectation up front, which then means some of these other trust behaviors come in when we are in this customer situation. Ironically, your question that was just asked is one of the examples that I discuss later to represent a customer stakeholder as perhaps one of the most important trust behaviors. When we have a customer as a supplier in a service organization like our own, it's to, here's what you can expect. Well, what can we expect? And then there's the practice accountability, which comes right below that, that goes along with that. Or as soon as we discover new information, creating that transparency with the customers, which can be difficult because it may change expectations as we clarify them. And these are things that when we have open dialogues about trust, which is what I consider to be most important, open discussion, open attention to trust. In my case, on a daily basis, I am thinking about these behaviors. This is why I said that they resonate, they impact me maybe more than any other book, is because they are part of my mindset at this point. And while it's not a perfect model, it sure does give us a good reference point. I did see, Max, one more question come in.
Yeah, Brad wrote, what's a good way to navigate maintaining trust with your direct reports when you don't feel trust for your leadership due to the leadership's actions?
Okay, this is a complex question there. The first is what I'm going to say. Again, if we look at these trust behaviors, which trust behaviors might come into play? And I can see listening first, right? Listening to some of the maybe the lack of trust that exists between yourself and maybe some direct reports, and listening to what they have to say without defensiveness. There's a time for that, without justification, but just hearing what they have to say. The other half of that is to create transparency. Create transparency to maybe the people above you while talking straight. But be careful, because truth can be used as a weapon. And if we're using it as a weapon, that is a counterfeit. And go back to my initial statement about trust being so complex. There's rarely a true right answer or wrong answer. Different people value different behaviors differently. Some people want the results, some people want the intent. Understanding that is a very important and key point that I mentioned later. And coming up with the solution to, let's say, your particular challenge, what I would suggest is an open dialogue. I'm more than happy, for instance, to go into more depth, but I would have to hear more details, more about some of the ways that you are perceiving your leadership team and what you are perceiving they are doing to maybe dislodge trust. Maybe ask about your behaviors and maybe how they might be contributing to some distrust of some of the employees. But what I can tell you is trust flows throughout the organization. Distrust can flow from the bottom up or the top down, and usually there isn't just one party to blame. That's part of the complexity. And as you've seen what I've talked about up to this point, very complex, not a perfect answer to every solution, but this dialogue, this personal dialogue, because it becomes so important. And trust is about relationships between people. Two businesses cannot technically on their own distrust each other. It's the people within the businesses that represent distrust. And when you look at our legal system, some places in the US where there are 3 engineers for every attorney in the United States, yet at one time, I don't know if this stat still holds true, there were 10 engineers in parts of Asia for every 1 attorney. If that's not a sign of distrust, I'm not sure what is, if that stat holds true. So very complex again, but look at these behaviors and understand, right, that they are each important. We each may value them a little bit differently. Another important aspect to think about, and now as I go into this, as I go into the next parts of the presentation, I want to use different examples real time. This one is about trust behavior 13, which is extending trust. However, the sweet spot concept pertains to every single trust behavior. What the sweet spot means is too little of it, completely too little of it, is a bad thing. And usually too much of it to the extreme is also a bad thing. Yet there's this middle area, the sweet spot, which can vary based on each behavior, that is very important. So let's look at extending trust to others. If you give it little thought at all, it's just happening, yet you actually extend trust. That's called blind trust. That's gullibility. That's just going overboard. Yet, if you deliberately, very deliberately withhold trust, right? There is distrust there and suspicion, and maybe you're on the wrong side. But instead, where's this careful balance of, you know what, take a little chance, extend trust to others. If you're a leader, extend trust to some of the other executives in your organization or managers. But do not ignore some of the facts, but do not be afraid. So there is this sweet spot concept that becomes very important for each of the behaviors. And I will talk a little bit about this in some of the behaviors as I discuss later on. So not only is there a sweet spot for every trust behavior, but now there's this concept of a counterfeit. And if I were to ask you, which one of these $100 bills is a counterfeit, there actually is a definitive answer in this picture. But how do you tell them apart? And that's what makes a counterfeit a good counterfeit. You can't. And just like counterfeit money, I do not condone counterfeits, but they are very real. The bottom dollar is the counterfeit here. I don't know how they tell it, but it's a real one. And that is not a good thing to be doing because it's a fake, but it looks the same. And we will get into what some of those counterfeits are a little later at some of these behaviors. Is there a related question, Max, right now?
There is not.
Okay. That question, I saw something come in, we can address a little bit later. Now, another complexity is that sometimes these behaviors compete against one another. Wait a second. And I'm going to give a very easy example. Have you ever asked the question, do I look good in this suit? And let's say you did not look good in that suit. What is that person supposed to answer? If there's somebody that values talking straight more than they may value showing loyalty or demonstrating respect, they may go, Curtis, that suit doesn't look good. Well, they value talking straight and you find out. But what about the person that says, I don't want to hurt their feelings. They're focused on intent. It doesn't look that bad. Oh no, all of a sudden they break talk straight so that they can demonstrate a little respect or show a little loyalty to you. This is yet another important intricacy of trust understand, is that sometimes these two things are at odds and competing against each other. And wow, what a difficult situation it is at that point to navigate. I think it was Vlad that mentioned it. It sounds that there will be competing trust behaviors in the scenario he's talking about, and that becomes very complex.
Curtis, we did get a question that came in, and I think it kind of does go along with where you're at right now. And he wrote, how do we measure or know we are at the sweet spot. Is there any indicators, or are we simply waiting for the reactions and act upon those?
How do we know? Absolute knowing is going to be very difficult. But what I think is a little bit easier is to know when it's not one of those. You need to, if you can, be more aware in the situation. When you are paying attention to trust, you start to see them more. When you stop blaming, when you assume good intent and say, okay, that person may have good intent, but then why are they behaving that way? Wait a minute, maybe I actually did something. And you'd be surprised how many people are, or probably, well, no, maybe you would be surprised at how many people are blind to their own trust failings, right? You're very aware of, oh yeah, that person broke trust by doing X, Y, and Z. Well, what about in that exact same situation? They're not very effective at saying, and in that situation, I could have listened first. I could have shown a little bit more loyalty to that person. That's where these things become more complex. There isn't a definitive line of the sweet spot. And that sweet spot may change because not only they're competing trust behaviors, but the other people in this human behavior have a different set of values. And that's an interesting concept. And I think that might be, well, okay, it's 2 slides ahead, and I'm going to go straight to it, and then I'll go back. Many people have heard of Myers-Briggs. That's a personality type. If there's a key takeaway, understand that almost every human has a trust type, where they value some aspect of this tree, some aspect of these behaviors more than others. There are probably many of you on this call that actually believe that being late to a meeting is disrespectful. I can't disagree with you. Maybe it is. And maybe it's disrespectful to you. But what about the people that actually don't find that as a means of disrespect? I can't argue with that as either. They're different. Everybody has a trust type, a trust emphasis, just like everybody has a personality type. And if we understand personality types like these, or in improving, we use DISC, D-I-S-C. I know how to interact with a D in a certain way that makes it more effective. I know how to interact with a C. And this is a language we can use. Trust can be a language we can use that makes our relationships and our world a better place. So let's take an example of talking straight. Covey describes this in summary as being honest, telling the truth, letting people know where you stand. Who's going to disagree with that? Who's going to disagree that the weakness of this is lie and deceive? Who's going to say, yeah, that's good? I don't. But I gave an earlier, if you're in a close relationship and it's an outfit, well, it was only a small lie because I wanted to demonstrate respect to them. They competed. What I can tell you is there's this thing called a counterfeit, and that's spinning, that's positioning, that's posturing, and that's manipulating. And now when we say manipulation, that has its own trendles that go out, because there's a fine line between inspiring and manipulating. Manipulation carries a very bad connotation, usually, at least in the English language. And what it usually means is it's assuming bad intent. But what about this last one? There is a counterfeit that's called hiding behind the truth. Have you ever been in a conversation or at work? Somebody has made a mistake and it has irritated you and you are frustrated and you make a comment that is true, it's absolutely true, and you point out to everybody that that person made a mistake, and you do it publicly. And you then come to these trust behaviors and you say, Curtis, I was just being transparent and just telling the truth. It's just the truth. You have actually used trust as a weapon. And if you want to destroy trust at an accelerated pace, you use trust as a weapon. What I can say in that situation, yes, you pointed out that this person made a mistake. And yes, you were being transparent, but yes, you were using it as a weapon and you broke demonstrate respect. You broke showing loyalty. And in the end, they usually damage themselves way more than that other person was damaged. So we have to be careful. Do not use trust as a weapon. And this is so easy to do. It's so easy to put blame. And maybe there is real blame, but there are ways of navigating trust where you do not use trust as a weapon. So that's a great example of here's the good aspects of it, here's the bad aspects of it, lying and deceiving, here's the counterfeit of spinning, and here's weaponization. And most trust behaviors can be weaponized.
Hey, Curtis, we did have another question that came in from Aaron. He was asking, when you work on teams of 3 to 12 people, how can you promote or lead assuming good intent across all members?
It's something I'm going to refer to later on. A team of 3 to 12 is sizable enough where it has its complexity and its diversity of trust desires. Yet it's not too big where you can't use what I call the platinum rule. Understanding where they are in their value systems in trust, and then try to meet them individually. What is a little harder is going across 100 people, 200 people. In the case of improving 1,000 people, I am almost guaranteed in almost every interaction to lose trust in some people and build trust in others. My objective is to move to the category of build trust with as many as I can, understanding which a personality like my own, it's crushing to understand I'm destroying trust, because whether they understand it or not, that is never my intent. But it could be unavoidable. But on a team of 3 to 12, I'm going to recommend actually bringing these things to light. At Improving, we have shifted more than 60% of our employees now in an initiative that's strategic across the entire company, are participating in what we call trust pods. And every employee within the next 2 years will be going through training this 17 continuous cycles, 17 weeks, going through the 4 cores, then going through the 13 behaviors. And as you bring more attention to the behaviors and you assume good intent in others, you would be surprised how the dialogue can open up the chain and down the chain and amongst peers, and how that environment becomes so much more safe. But we are very deliberately on a weekly basis having these discussions. And that does not, and just to quickly, it's not just about business. If you think about if you are married or have a partner, with that partner, you can have these discussions. If you have children, you can have these discussions with your children. Or even friends that you love, but something's not going right. When you open up these discussions, it is surprisingly magical what it can do. There is a caveat because victim mindset, which is an entire different subject and different psychology, can disrupt building trust in its own right. And we usually combine them in our discussions.
It's a great point, Curtis. We did have another question that came in from Vladimir that's, kind of more on that personal level. He wrote, there's been people in my life in which I have managed to break trust, and no matter what, it felt like they're attacking me. They probably assumed that I had bad intent. Some people assume my bad intent without even knowing me based on my nationality, for instance. What are the options to get out of these adversarial relationships, or is it even worth trying?
I like your worth trying. There is a point, and this is called the Confront Reality, that if you can look objectively at yourself and your actions, you can then confront the reality that maybe there is almost nothing you can do to restore that trust. Maybe the withdrawal of that trust account was so big that you're building trust at $10 increments, but that withdrawal was $1 million increment. And this is one of the things that hurts me the most in my own, because I focus on this, I can see where my trust accounts are dwindling. The vast majority, and when I say the vast majority of my relationships are in the positive. And I can honestly think of only one that I have that is just so expired. The trust tax is so high, and their unwillingness to want to forgive, in that case, there's almost nothing we can do. I still try, and I still test the waters in certain cases, but confronting reality is something. In that case, what I want to encourage you to do is try to forgive and understand them. Realize it may not be you, it may be them, not in a bad way. They may have a block. They may have been hurt and can't get through that hurt, something like that. And again, these become complex. I love these questions. These are the types of things you explore when you are having this discussion once a week, and with a group of people that are trusted over an extended period of time. Open these discussions, start them. And what do some of these discussions look like? And I want to talk about trust in our stakeholders, and I'm going to start with something that we call our 6-hand story. And this is a story about trust in the technology industry, or in this case, a lack of trust in the technology industry. I had been invited to this Conscious Capitalism CEO Summit. And this is a pretty big organization. It was started by John Mackey of Whole Foods, the CEO of Whole Foods, and Kip Tindall of the CEO of Container Store, many others. And I'm at this CEO Summit, and at the time, Improving is a $9 million company. And they have couches in the conference. I'm sitting next to Doug Rao, president of Trader Joe's, another gentleman who was one of the presidents of one of the operating divisions of Starbucks. The keynote speaker asked a simple question. How many of you had such a great experience with your IT team that you are willing to share with the people next to you? And of course, my hand went up. And as I look around a room of nearly 250 CEOs, there were only 6 hands. I could literally count the hands that were up. The keynote speaker, the opening keynote speaker, mind you, my first 3 minutes into this, he then says, "It does not surprise me, because only sales professionals have a worse perception amongst CEOs than IT professionals." And that crushed me. I'm an IT professional, and honestly, I'm also a business development sales professional. So you're winning first and second in the race you don't want to win first and second in. And you want them, and you got both. That hurt. That stung. In fact, I did not hear the rest of the keynote. But at the end of the keynote, and as I'm taking notes, I first got defensive. I realized there was a reality to this. And that's literally the ambition that Improving has today, is to change the perception of the IT professional. And I'm not saying it's right or wrong. It doesn't matter. That's the perception that we have. And that is why when you land on our website, this is the message you see, that trust changes everything. If we want to change that perception, we must focus on trust. There is another slide to this later. It's a little out of order, and I'll get back to it. And then we talk about our stakeholder model. As I mentioned, we have our clients, we have our suppliers, employees, right? Our industry, the communities, the partners we have, and how do these trust behaviors relate to them? Let's talk about a partner, like I mentioned, or industry. For one, for an entrepreneur, capitalism itself is a stakeholder. And that may be hard for people to jump, that capitalism, but it is a stakeholder in our stakeholder model. And what do I mean by confront reality? The behavior says to tackle all issues head on, to address the tough stuff directly. Don't ignore that reality or be in denial, but don't focus. The counterfeit is focus on side issues while skirting the real issues. Think about how often that happens in business. And here's the reality that when we're talking about capitalism, when I search for capitalism on Google, and if you did, you're going to see many of these images. Wow. What you don't find is this image on the right. You find the images on the left. Why is that? Why is that when capitalism, when you really look at it, has lifted so many people out of poverty since the 1970s, and you can look these statistics up, mainly with the introduction of either direct capitalism or capitalistic tendencies and policies in Asia. We have reduced poverty while elevating wealth, but we have reduced poverty by 60%. Look at the trend. Yes, there is a gap, I would say, between the wealth but actually the gap is what we are seeking. Yet somehow capitalism, going back, gets associated with everything on the left and not really about what's on the right. And here's what I have to say to that, and this is a key point. Perception is not necessarily reality. And we can wallow in that. We can get frustrated with well, that's not real. And I say, so what? Because often perception is stronger than reality. And either way, we have to own it. We must own reality, whether it's perceived reality or real reality. If somebody thinks that we are not a good person, we can say we are a good person, but it doesn't matter. In fact, we may actually be a great person, but some reason we have to own it either way. And key point here, individually or as an organization, or in the case of our industry, doesn't matter if it's real. I can tell you that the technology profession as general has great intent. In fact, they have incredible capability, extremely smart when you look at it as a general, but we have a perception that needs to be addressed. And so reality may not matter as much as perception. Let's look at another one. Let's look at our suppliers. Demonstrate respect is one of the behaviors I want to talk about when you're dealing with a supplier. And I put this at, talking about key commitments and platinum rule, that's a reminder to myself. But caring for others and show it, treat everybody with respect, right? Don't don't show disrespect, or to not care about people. There's a counterfeit, which is scary, which is faking respect. But if you are in a business and you have a contract with somebody, contract is there to try to clarify expectations. That's one of the purposes of a contract. Yet you hope you never go to it. That's the vehicle to clarify. Well, when it comes to payment in the services industry, you would be surprised how many of our clients do not pay within the terms of their contract, and how many times that they may use counterfeits to justify why they're not paying on time. Okay, we can be victims, which I'm not, but that's how it is. Well, wait a second, we have a supplier. I want to talk a little bit about the platinum rule, right? The golden rule in this case: treat others as you would like to be treated. Well, as a supplier, I want people to live into their commitments. Well, it's a good thing then for me to live into the commitments of our suppliers. If I have a term of 15 days, then it doesn't matter if I haven't received money or something, I still have a commitment to them. At least the commitment to talk straight and be transparent in the case where maybe funds are not flowing or something. Very important. So we try to treat our suppliers in this regard, for instance, which is a key stakeholder, in a way that maybe we are treated not as well. Now, let me talk a little bit about the platinum rule, another key concept here. It is just as powerful, if not more powerful, than the golden rule, but treat others the way they would like to be treated. And where this becomes more powerful, think back to what I said about the trust behaviors, that each of us has a trust profile. You may have heard of love languages. And if you have heard of that concept, some people have the love language of physical touch, and others have the love language of gifts. Others have words of affirmation, acts of service, or quality time. Those are the 5 love languages proposed by that subject. What you learn there is the platinum rule. My love language is words of affirmation. But if I'm in a relationship that the language is quality time, I am much better served by treating them how they want to be treated than how I want to be treated. I want the words of affirmation. Imagine if I'm giving them to them, but they don't value it. And so in any relationship, just like trust, moving to this platinum rule is an incredible tool. How do they want to be treated? They want quality time, then I'll give them quality time, but I'll also be transparent and tell them that I need words of affirmation. Employees showing loyalty. This is common, whether we're talking about peers or whether you're talking about your leaders or associates. Giving credit to others. Speak about other people as if they were right there. This might be the most broken rule I see of trust in most organizations. How many people are talking about the bad things happening? Oh, I'd talk about it if they were here. Maybe, usually not with the same tone, maybe with not the same animosity. And just understand that no matter what you think, if you are gossiping, if you are talking negative about anybody behind their back, you are actually hurting yourself way more than you're hurting them. And that is a reality that so many people I see have a challenge accepting. I see this all the time, and I shake my head in almost sadness because I go, wow, they're damaging themselves and they don't even know it. They think that by telling me all these challenges right? And it's not that they're bringing the challenge to me, it's that they're talking about the people. Customers, I mentioned this a little bit, and I think I know I'm running a little bit on time as I'm trying to moderate. Clarifying expectations. Since I talked about this a little bit earlier, it is one of the most important things we can do with our customers. What are the expectations? But this is, and even though I say this is where customers and suppliers tend to get in disagreement. And it seems to be one of the most common areas. So having early discussions, or when expectations must change, earlier discussion, the better. One of my other favorite sayings is that if we do not pay for the difficult discussions today, we're going to pay with compounding interest tomorrow. And that tends to be a reality as well. In our industry, deliver results. For those of you that are in the technology industry, I'm going to quickly go through this. There's something called Scrum and the Agile Manifesto, where there are these 4 Agile values. And the very first one saying that all these things are important, but we need to focus on individuals and interactions over processes and tools. Ironically, even with all this rhetoric, this is such good intent. I'm going to say the vast majority of organizations focus on, here's how you do process, here's how you do Agile. At improving, I'm saying, here's how we try to do our interactions. We focus on trust because that actually is more important than the process. Yet we're very fortunate that the process itself lends itself into the trust behaviors, but the intent is to focus on individuals and interactions. And as I wrap up today here, and maybe there's time for a question or two, I want you to understand trust is complex and it's not easy. It takes effort. Every interaction we have is an opportunity to build trust or destroy it. Assuming good intent is probably one of the most effective ways to extend trust. And trust is like a personality where each one of us has different values. And we are served better if we follow the platinum rule and the golden rule, not just the golden rule. Because this world becomes a much better place if we can just focus a little bit on trust each and every day. And in improving, I say our first job every day is not to build software, but our first job every day is to try to make the effort. We aspire to build trust with our stakeholders. I am so grateful of your time today and appreciate each one of you. And in close, while we may have a question or two for those that may want to stay on, I want to say that if you want a copy of this book, The Speed of Trust, where a lot of what you are seeing, please email Dawn below at that email. We'll leave it up here and we will get you a copy of this book. I will tell you that there's been a strong demand right now, and we have been only able to get them in tranches of 4 and 5 books at a time, but we will get you your book if you want one. It is something that we are passionate about here, and I personally hope that after today, each of you will want to spend a little time in this. Thank you. And maybe with that, Max, we have a question or two we can answer.
Yeah, well, I think you hit on one of these questions that came in, which is there any additional reading that you would suggest?
There's a little, I would start here. And then if you like this and it resonates, I would say, and you're in services, I would move to The Trusted Advisor, which is another book. Great book.
Yeah, absolutely. And that kind of goes in flow. Vladimir wrote again, it's kind of interesting. If this is so complex, is it a bad idea to have a trust coach?
No. And we take that in the flavor of these trust huddles where you have a group of 4 or 5 that are holding each other accountable, that are coaching each other along the way on a weekly basis. So it's a great idea. We just do it in the form of small groups, small intimate groups.
Awesome. Well, that was our last question, Curtis. And I want to say thank you all for attending. And Curtis, thank you again for sharing. The recording of this session will be available at theimprovingedge.com. And as a reminder, registration is still open for the final talk. I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Thanks, Curtis.
Thank you, Max.